Welcome to Virtual Counterculture. I'm Susan Axelrod, editor of Culture Magazine, and I'm really excited to be with you this afternoon to taste these 6 amazing cheeses from Europe. Our partner today is Agriform AOP, and I'm also thrilled that Emilia D'Albero of the Green Grape, who I've gotten to know over some time, has agreed to host today. And she knows so much about these cheeses, and I'm sure you're going to learn a lot as well as have a great time. I hope you've gotten your cheeses all out and at room temperature. I'll just show you my board. I'm very excited to be tasting and learning along with you this afternoon. Just a couple of housekeeping details. Everyone, please use the chat feature to ask questions anytime during the presentation, and we'll do our best to answer them when we can. But we want this to be an interactive, fun experience, so don't hesitate to ask questions anytime. There'll also be a dedicated 10-minute Q&A session at the end. So without any further delay, Emilia, you've got a lot to talk about, so I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Susan. Hi, everyone, or should I say ciao, benvenuti, since we are tasting some wonderful European cheeses today. Like she said, my name is Emilia, and I'm going to be talking to you about the 6 cheeses that we have to taste this evening. It is 4 p.m. Perfect time to eat cheese. So before I start, I just want to say thank you to Culture Magazine for hosting this incredible webinar, and thank you to Agriform as well for allowing me this opportunity to teach you about these amazing cheeses. If you don't already know me, or if you haven't met me at one of the many cheese industry events that I've attended in the last couple of years. Again, my name is Emilia D'Albero. I was born into a very Italian-American family, so I am very familiar with these cheeses from my childhood. They have a special place in my heart, and I'm very excited to be teaching about them today. And not only that, I also have a degree in Italian language and studies. I graduated from Montclair State University, and I studied Italian culture and specifically the food aspect of Italian culture, which is another reason why I feel very connected to these products. I have been cheesemongering in New York City for about 5 years. I've worked for Italy, I've worked for Foragers, Campbell Cheese, a lot of different counters across New York City, and currently I'm working as the cheese department manager and buyer for the Green Grape in Brooklyn. I also am an ACS certified cheese professional, a CMI, a Cheesemonger Invitational finalist and winner in 2021. I've taught classes all over the city about cheese. I've taught at Italy, the Campari Academy, the French Cheese Board, and I've done some various webinars and in-person events actually for Culture Magazine. And last but not least, I do run a very popular TikTok account for cheese education, and I've appeared on some podcasts in different newspapers and online publications. So a very long list of the reasons why I feel that I should be the person here to tell you about these cheeses today. As we go along in the class, if you have any questions, you can leave them in the chat box. I would like to keep this very casual, more like a conversation, and then we'll address the questions as they come up. And then we also have the Q&A session at the very end. Apologies for my nasaliness. I have a little bit of a cold that's going around, but nothing that would stop me from sharing these cheeses with you today. So currently, I'm working as the department manager and buyer for the cheese department at the Green Grape. We are a specialty grocery store, full service grocery store in the heart of Fort Greene in Brooklyn. And my job is to manage the cheese counter and curate the selection of items, cheese, charcuterie, and then all different accoutrements that we sell and that we share with our customers. And that can be at times over 250 to 300 different items that I curate from Europe, from the United States, from everywhere. And so my job there is mainly to do the research, curate the selection, bring all of those items in, and then teach my team how to properly care for and sell them. So that is what we're going to be doing today. Again, thank you to Culture and Agriform. We're going to taste through all of these 6 beautiful cheeses together, and I'll be explaining to you why they are so special and why they deserve a place on your counter and, most importantly, in your customers' baskets. Just before we get started, I do want to tell a quick story about one of the cheeses. Piave is actually my very first favorite cheese before I was even a cheesemonger. I went to college, like I said, at Montclair State University, and there was a Fairway in Montclair, in the town. And every Sunday I would go to Fairway and get, my groceries, my olive oils, my special breads, whatever. And one day they were doing a cheese tasting, and the cheese was Piave. And I remember tasting it and saying, wow, I didn't know that cheese could taste like this. This is incredible. And I was just obsessed with it. So every week since then, while I was in college, I would go to Fairway and get my little piece of Piave. And it really was one of the things that kickstarted my interest in cheese and my desire to become a cheesemonger. So that's a fun little anecdote about Piave, which we will be tasting today. And I just wanted to share that with you. So one of the phrases that you may have noticed on all of the campaign materials is made with amore, and amore in Italian means love. And while all of these cheeses were definitely made with love, as you can tell, it did remind me of one of my favorite quotes about cheese that I want to start this off with. And that is that cheese is the most romantic link between humans and the earth. And of course, no one does romance better than the Europeans, whether that's dairy-based or otherwise. So just keeping that in mind as we go into the tasting. I want to talk about Agriform very quickly. Agriform AOP is not a producer of cheese, actually, but they are an association that partners with dairy cooperatives in northern Italy, where all of these cheeses are from, in order to promote the cheeses that are made by their thousands of dairy farmer partners. So their goal, Agriform's goal, is to promote the sale of and education about these authentic products. And by doing so, they're keeping these traditions alive. They're keeping the cheese making traditions and recipes alive. All of these cheeses that we're tasting today, and I'll show you my little board, it's a little bit less impressive than Susan's. I have little chunks on there. All of the cheeses that we're tasting today are AOP cheeses, but since these are all made in Italy, we would call them DOP or DOP or PDO, however you want to say it. And that means that they are name protected. And in Italian, we would say denominazione d'origine protetta, which means protecting designation of origin. And the PDO seal, if you're not already familiar with it, is on I think it's the next slide. Yes, so that the little red and yellow seal, and that is going to be present on all of the cheeses, all of the packaging for these cheeses, and that signifies that they are PDO cheeses, they are name protected, and they are authentic, the real deal. And so that's what we're trying to encourage our customers to look for, to be informed consumers of these products. It means the PDO system is inherently connected to the concept of terroir. And we do talk about terroir in cheese the same way that we talk about terroir in wine. And we know that it contributes to the specific flavor of each of the cheeses that you're going to taste. Terroir, if you're not already familiar with the word, I know that we have some different skill levels, knowledge levels in the class today. So I'm just going to go through and explain all of the different terms that I'm using so that everyone is on the same page. Terroir is the way that specific human environmental conditions of a certain geographical area affect the final flavor of a cheese. It is a holistic reflection of that region's history, geography, and social structure. And in some cases, there are specific types of cheese that were created as a response to specific environmental circumstances and challenges. So I'll talk a little bit about that as we go through the cheeses. And it's important to talk about that as it relates to the name protection system, because nowadays there are so many imitation cheeses that are being produced that are copies of the cheeses that we're tasting today. And they're meant to dupe customers into purchasing lower quality products at a price that undercuts the producers of the authentic versions. So the cheeses we're tasting today are some of the most widely imitated cheeses in the entire world. And because these imitation products are not being made according to consortium guidelines in those areas of designation, they don't taste the same, and they're likely not following the same strict food safety and production guidelines that are set by the consortiums. And so the rules are there for a reason. They are not arbitrary. These end up being like European sounding or European style products rather than authentic versions. And so this actually is harmful to both the producers and the consumer. So it's something to keep in mind as we go along here. As cheesemongers, it's our duty to help educate those customers so that they know how important it is to purchase the authentic AOP versions of these historic cheeses. And as buyers, if you are in a buying position like me, it's our duty to stock our counters with the highest quality versions of these historic products, and then tell our team exactly how to convey that information to our customers. Purchasing and selling AOP cheese ensures that you're getting the most authentic version of that recipe, which also guarantees the highest quality product and the best flavor. It's really important to note that some, if not all, of these recipes are hundreds of years old. And like we said, they're inherently connected to the local history and economy. So the money spent on these AOP products goes right back to those local economies and to the producers who are keeping these cheese-making traditions alive. So just something like a big picture thing to keep in mind as we go through all of these cheeses today. So before we do the tasting, which I know you're all very eager to do, I am too, I do want to just note that I have all of my cheeses ready to taste on this little plate here. I've got my jams and I had a fennel salami in my box, as well as a little piece of chocolate, which was awesome. Great pairings for these cheeses. And it's important to always take your cheese out 30 to 45 minutes before you serve it, so that you are going to be able to taste all of the nuances of the flavor and the texture that the cheesemaker intended for you to experience. I've also got some of the crackers that came in the box. These are really important to eat between each cheese to try to cleanse your palate. And they're also really great vehicles for all of these cheeses because they're very subtly flavored. They are not going to overwhelm the flavor of the cheese at all. And they provide a really great texture contrast. The crunchiness of the cracker with like some of the softer cheeses, they have a really creamy texture. It's really great contrast. So we are going to start with the Grana Padano, but before I start telling you about Grana, I do want to just go over quickly the proper way to taste cheese. And it's a lot more than just kind of like putting it in your mouth and chewing. So I have crumbles of my Grana actually, and I used a knife like this to actually make little chunks off of the larger piece. This is just a smaller version of the tools that you would use to open a wheel of Parmigiano. I also, for any of my friends in the chat, I have my little Parm knife tattoo on here that shows how committed I am to this. Sorry, Mom. So you're going to take your cheese. I have a piece of Grana Padano DOP right in my hands, and you're just going to look at it and take note of what color it is. Does it have any eyes? Does it have any fissures in there? Does it have any crystals? And all of those things that you see or don't see are going to give you clues as to what it might taste like, how old it is, what kind of milk it's made out of. There's a lot that you can deduce just by looking at a cheese. And the next step is going to be to smell it. You don't have to, put it right up there, but just give it a quick little sniff. This one's pretty subtle. It smells nutty. It smells a little bit like hay. Is there anything specific that anyone's getting in the aroma of the Grana Padano? I'm trying to see if we have the chat here. No questions. Great. Awesome. So the next step would be to actually like press it between your fingers and see what the texture is like. Is it squishy? Does it break easily? Does it have a really short, crumbly texture? It helps to do this to just really understand the cheese that you're about to enjoy. And obviously the last step is to taste it. So let's all take a bite together. This is good. It's a younger Grana. It's not too dry. Really great flavor. And as you bite, as you chew the cheese, make sure that you're getting the flavor to coat your entire palate. You want to press the cheese up against the roof of your mouth, let the flavor coat your whole palate, and then you can also breathe out while you're chewing, and then you get all of those retronasal aromas. That's really going to intensify that flavor for you. How do we feel about that? Do we like it? Any comments, questions? Cool, awesome. I mean, it seems like everyone likes that cheese. What's not to like about it? Grana is the #1 most consumed PDO cheese in the entire world, which is my very first fun fact about Grana Padano. Another fun fact is that Agriform producers actually make more Grana Padano than any other producer in the consortium. And so that is about 5 million wheels produced annually. And the history of this cheese is long. It dates back to the 12th century. It was invented by the Cistercian monks and was traditionally consumed by both nobility for celebration and by laborers in the countryside for nutrition and sustenance. So it has a really beautiful dual identity that transcends economic boundaries. And that's part of the reason, in my opinion, why it has endured for so long and become such a well-loved cheese. And it did receive PDO status in 1996, so fairly recently as compared to the entire system, but in cheese years, that is a very long time. Grana means grain in Italian, and it refers to its granular texture. And you can, it is pretty apparent in this age profile. It becomes more apparent in the older age profiles. And then the Padano part of the name Grana Padano refers to the production area in the Pianura Padana, which is the Po River Valley that contains the 5 regions that make up the area of designation for this cheese. And that is Piemonte, Trentino, Emilia-Romagna, Lombardia, and the Veneto. And you can see that on the map there. According to the PDO guidelines, Grana Padano is made exclusively with raw cow's milk and traditional animal rennet. And unlike its counterpart, Parmigiano Reggiano, the cheese is made only using evening milk, which goes into copper vats specifically that can hold enough milk to produce 2 wheels of cheese each. Perfect, I was just gonna ask for that. And you can see the nitty-gritty details of the production process on the slide here. And the milk is also partially skimmed. And you can see the specifics of that process on the slide. So kind of the flow chart here from milking the cows all the way to aging. We'll talk a little bit about that, but this is a really great chart to show the flow of the process and some details about the cheese. So you can see the copper vats in the slide there. You can see them working. The formed curd, or what we call green cheese, it just means cheese that has not been aged yet. They're so heavy. These wheels after aging are anywhere between 80 and 90 pounds, and it takes about 16 pounds of milk to make 1 wheel of cheese. So if we do the math there, we can imagine that those unaged wheels with all of that moisture content are so heavy. So because they can't lift it by themselves, they're using a wooden paddle and then a cloth that is called a schiavino, which helps lift the curd out of the vat and then to set it to drain. So the young cheeses are placed into molds to drain for about 12 hours. And then they have these plates, which are kind of like a long, I think they're metal, that they insert into the molds in between the mold and the cheese. And that is what creates the indentations on the rind that have the branding, the consortium branding, the identification marks, the dairy identification number, and then the date of production. So after this, the wheels are brined for about 3 weeks, which is really important. And if you've been in any of my other webinars that I've taught, we do talk a lot about the importance of salt in the cheese making process. It isn't just, you know, as simple as, oh, it makes the cheese more flavorful. It does affect flavor, but it also affects moisture content, rind formation, the pH of a cheese, which affects a lot of microbial activity within it. So the way a cheese is salted is incredibly important and affects so many other parts of the process. And later in the presentation, we'll talk more about the different cheeses that are salted differently. So Grana Padano, yes.
I'm sorry, I have a question.
Yes.
Someone asked, I bought Grana Padano for my shop and it has egg whites in it. Is this normal? Did I buy a subpar product?
I want to say that that's normal. I have seen that. I think that has something to do with what we're going to talk about in a minute, which is the lysozyme, but I could be wrong. That's something I've encountered only a few times on a few cheeses, but I'd be happy to look into that for you and get you an answer after the class. I'll make a note about that. Thank you, Courtney. So Grana Padano is aged for a minimum of 9 months as compared to a minimum of 12 for Parmigiano Reggiano. However, it's aged for an average of 16 months. And then of course we know the flavor intensifies as it ages. Sorry about that, I have a little bit of a cold. So this age profile that we're tasting is anywhere between, I believe, 12 and 18 months that they said. We're not sure the exact production date, but it does have a fairly soft and delicate texture. Like I said, it smells like hay. It's got this beautiful nutty flavor, which makes it really great for grating on top of pasta or in pesto. I love putting Grana Padano in pesto because it doesn't overwhelm the flavor of the basil. Sometimes Parm can be a little bit too intense for pesto, so Grana is a great option for that. And you also got a little recipe book in your boxes that have more ideas of how to incorporate these cheeses into everyday recipes. So we're going to move on to Parmigiano Reggiano, my personal favorite cheese. And this is also what we call a Grana style cheese. So Grana, as we know, just means grain. It refers to that really granular texture. So Parmigiano Reggiano is known as the king of cheese, and also got its PDO in 1996. And again, one of the most widely copied cheeses in the world. So I want to touch briefly on the fact that if you are buying Parmigiano Reggiano, you need to look for the name Parmigiano Reggiano DOP, because Parmesan or Parmesan are completely different from the real thing. Those are the names that people give to the cheeses when they can't legally call them Parmigiano Reggiano. So they're not interchangeable. And I do want to make that very clear. Again, originated in the 12th century, and again, made by monks. Those monks were working really hard back then. And it was also made with raw cow's milk because there's an abundance of water and ample pasture, which is great for cows. They can thrive, and cows drink a lot of water. Today, there are 380 cheesemakers that represent over 3,500 milk producers. And they're all working towards conserving this historic recipe and production method. And of course, Agriform is helping with that. And so are we all here today. It has a much smaller area of designation than Grana Padano does. And you can see the 5 provinces on the slide where it is allowed to be made. And it is also, just like Grana, made with raw cow's milk and traditional animal rennet, and is naturally lactose free. And I want to talk about rennet and lactose really quickly, because there have been some, viral posts or videos or whatever you want to call them on the internet from people who are just discovering rennet. So I thought I would talk about that a little bit and how to kind of tell that information to customers who have questions, who may have seen these videos and want the correct information. So For those of you who don't know, rennet is an enzyme that is taken from the fourth stomach of a ruminant animal, a baby ruminant animal. It is the enzyme that coagulates milk and separates it into curds and whey. And there are different types of rennet now, such as microbial or thistle derived, but all of the cheeses that we are tasting today are made with traditional animal rennet, which has been proven to be more effective for longer aged cheeses, and also reduces the risk of defects or off flavors in the final product. Lactose, most aged cheese is lactose free. And the reason for that is that during cheese making, the lactose or milk sugar is converted into lactic acid, and all of the residual lactose after that continues to be converted during the aging process. So after about 8 or 9 months is what I've been told, the lactose content of a cheese is basically undetectable. And it's part of the beauty of cheese, right? That it's essentially a pre-digested version of milk. So you're getting all of these nutrients and you get none of the pain and none of the uncomfortable side effects, unless of course you unfortunately happen to be allergic to dairy itself, which is a whole nother conversation. But 2 very fun facts that customers love to find out. So getting back to Parmigiano, there are different types of Parmigiano that are made from the milk of different breeds of cow. You've heard of like Vacca Rossa, white cow, brown cow, Bruna Alpina. Most Parmigiano Reggiano is made from the milk of Holstein cows because they produce the highest volume of milk of any cow. And these, if you're not familiar with them, are the quintessential thing that we imagine when we hear a cow. They're like the black and white guys, or ladies, technically. Those are the one that you just imagine. It's the image that it conjures up. So fun fact about that. And Parmigiano Reggiano does undergo a very similar make as Grana Padano, coagulation with animal rennet, cutting the curd into very, very small grain-sized pieces. The tool that they're using to cut those curds is called a spino. And they're also cooking the curd, brining the wheels, and then they're being marked with all of the consortium branding. Cutting and cooking the curd, I do want to touch on. Those are both done for a very specific reason. And that reason is whey expulsion, which is also called syneresis. The smaller the curds are, the more surface area you have, which equals more moisture loss, more whey expulsion. And then cooking the curd also does the same thing. It releases whey. This is the part of the process that cheesemakers do to create a drier, more crumbly texture in the final product. And a cheese that's meant to be aged out like Grana or like Parm, these are essential parts of that process. Unlike Grana Padano, Parmigiano is aged for a minimum of 12 months, like I said, at which point experts from the consortium, they go to the aging facilities and they test every single wheel to decide if it if it passes the test and it receives the large consortium branding, if it meets all of their requirements. So in my shop, our house Parmigiano is roughly 2 years, 2.5 years, but I've actually eaten Parmigiano wheels that have been aged for up to 10 years. Were they good? We'll talk about it, but they sure did exist. If a wheel doesn't meet the requirements to get the PDO branding, it is actually stripped of its PDO markings on the side of the rind, and then they either feed it to pigs or they turn it into other cheese-based products. So it doesn't get just thrown out, which is great. We have our Parm here. It's a very similar age profile to the Grana Padano. So again, we're going to just smell it. We're going to taste it. I've noticed that the Parm does have a little bit more crystallization than the Grana. And those crystals are actually not salt. This is another thing that customers love to find out. The crystals are called tyrosine or tyrosine, however you want to pronounce it. And they're just buildups of amino acids. They occur naturally as cheese ages. Then we sometimes call them flavor crystals, if that's easier to pronounce. Not because they add any specific flavor, but because when you see them in a cheese, you know that you're about to eat a cheese with really big, really intense flavor. And it just helps us determine if a cheese has been like aged well. So we're going to take a bite of this Parm here. Not too dry, pretty creamy texture. It's a little bit more savory than the Grana, I think. This one is tasting a little fruity to me. Is anyone getting like tropical fruit, pineapple
am.
even? Yeah.
Definitely.
I love that, like this is for me the sweet spot for Parmigiano Reggiano, anywhere between like 15 months to 2 years. It has this really beautiful like pineapple-y flavor almost in some wheels, and it's so delicate. I just love it. So this one I like to say you can pair with kind of like medium bodied wines from the same region. I really love Parm with a savory shallot jam. And my personal favorite pairing is just a drizzle of aged balsamic vinegar from Modena, another name protected product. And so this kind of plays into the idea that what grows together goes together, which is one of the guidelines that I use when I'm teaching about pairing. So things from the same region paired really well together. I'm so sorry. So on the last slide, about Parm versus Grana, one of the main differences that I want to touch on is the allowance of silage as feed for the animals. And silage is fermented hay or other plant products that is stored in a silo. And while it is a good alternative to fresh grass, it can also contain some harmful bacteria, which is where lysozyme comes into play. So lysozyme is a protein that inhibits bacterial growth that could cause defects in the final product after the cows eat the silage. But because there's no additives allowed in the production of Parmigiano Reggiano, silage is not allowed. So both of these cheeses, they're very, very similar, but they have some very nuanced differences. So Grana Padano does allow the use of silage, and Parmigiano Reggiano does not. And there's also some differences in the area of designation, as well as the yearly production. There's more Grana Padano produced every year. And you can see all of those stats on the slide. And one more slide, please. I have created this cutting diagram, which I'm very excited about, because a lot of people, they ask me like, how do you get your parm cuts so even? This is how I've been cutting my parm and my grana for 5 years now, and I want to share this knowledge. So if you want to take a picture, if you want to take a screenshot, go right ahead. Essentially the process is you're going to break the wheel in half using your parm tools, and then I break it into quarters as well. Belly that quarter, and so you're left with that 1/8 piece. And then I just go straight down the middle of that 1/8 piece to create these very thin triangles, take off the nose, and then like 2 or 3 smaller pieces from that nose. And then you can cut radially and create square pieces. And then you're just going to go diagonal on the square pieces, and you are left with the 4 pieces that I have at the very bottom. I think that it's important to realize that not everyone is looking for the same piece of cheese. Some people want more, some people want less. So that's why I like having this variety of sizes, so that I have something for everyone. Any questions about that?
We do have a question about what the 10-year-old parm tasted like.
It was really crunchy and didn't have much flavor beyond that, which was disappointing. Yeah.
It's kind of like if you,
it was a little too dry.
Sometimes if you drink a really old wine and everybody's like, ooh, this is like 30 years old. Sometimes it's not good.
It was kind of like that. I had high hopes and then I was disappointed. Sorry. Great, so we'll move on to Piave. All right, so my very first favorite cheese, Piave, is one of the most loved hard cheeses from Europe. It originates from the Belluno area in the northernmost part of the Veneto region. It takes its name from the Piave River that flows at the foot of the mountain range, which is the Dolomiti, the Dolomites in English. There's a lot of things that I learned about in Italian that I have never actually had to pronounce in English. So please correct me if I pronounce any of that wrong. So the cheese originated as a result of economic decline as a way to preserve the abundant milk in the area and provide sustenance for the residents of the area. The dairy cooperative, the first one, was founded in Belluno in 1872, and it laid the foundations for the dairy industry in that region. And since then, the dairy tradition of Piave production has been handed down for generations. And Piave received its PDO status fairly recently in 2010. The difference between this one and the two cheeses that we previously tasted is that it is made exclusively with pasteurized milk and partially skimmed milk from 2 milkings. And again, we have traditional rennet. This cheese is also uncooked, but it is pressed, and both of those things are to obtain the desired texture, which if you take your piece of Piave, you'll notice that it is less granular and a little bit more dense. And that is as a result of the different steps of the process, not cooking the curd and then also pressing it to knit the curds together. It's a little bit more dense. It's more toothsome if you take a bite of it. It definitely has like almost a waxy consistency. I'm not saying that in a bad way at all. It's just an observation about the texture. And these are much smaller wheels. Instead of being 80 to 90 pounds, they're like 12 to 15 pounds, totally manageable. And they are brined as well for 48 hours and then aged anywhere between 20 days and 18 months. And you can see all of those different age profiles on the slide here. The one that we're tasting today is Piave Stravecchio, which means extra old, extra aged. And the flavor, since we are tasting the older version, the flavor is more intense. It's going to be more nutty. This one also, I think, has a lot of fruity flavors. This feels very like stone fruity to me, almost like peaches or apricots. I love Piave for a variety of reasons. Not only because it is delicious, but because it provides a really great alternative to something like a Parmigiano or a Grana Padano for anyone who has dietary restrictions or is pregnant and they can't eat raw milk. Piave is a really great alternative to suggest. And it was, you know, one of our best-selling cheeses when I worked at Italy. It was one of our best-selling cheeses at the Green Grape. People just love it. It's an easy snackable cheese. Great on cheese platters. You can melt it if you grate it. It's just awesome. How are we feeling? Do we like Piave? Do we have anyone who's never tried it before? Is this anyone's first Piave experience?
I do have a question, Emilia. Oh, somebody
Yes.
says it is their first. Yay.
Wow. I'm so happy to share this moment with you guys.
So we've got a few people that is their first. And somebody asked, does it taste similar to Hallerhocker to anybody else?
I think for me, it's a little too sweet to be like Hallerhocker. It also has a much more toothsome texture, but if you want, I can pull some Hallerhocker out of my fridge and like we can do a comparison real quick. I have American Hallerhocker and I have European Hallerhocker, which are very, very slightly different. So if anyone wants to do a vertical tasting after this, let me know.
I think somebody says the texture reminds them of the Hallerhocker, and
I can see that.
Somebody says this is the most aged Piave they've had. Very delicious.
Yes, I do prefer it more aged.
I also have an interesting question.
Yes.
Is the Parmesan rind the only one that you can cook with?
No, I mean, theoretically, most of the cheeses on this board you can cook with the rind because they're all, as far as I know, they're all natural rinds. What I normally do, even with parm rinds, is I will take it and I will grate off like a very thin layer from the top because, you know, again, you know, don't know where these wheels have been, who's touched them. So just like for sanitary reasons, I'll grate the thin layer off. And some of these cheeses do have like a very thin layer of like a very food safe coating of something on them. But once you get that off, you can definitely throw it in there. Throw it in your sauces, your soups, stocks, risotto. I make broth out of it. I have a collection of rinds in my freezer right now.
Emilia, I have another comment. Someone says this was our cheese of the month in November. Way too difficult to sell in such quantities during holiday season. So maybe that was a question of it just not being familiar to people where you are, where this person is, Lindsay.
Maybe Yeah, it is. It's a tough cheese. It's a really tough cheese to cut, especially if it's an older profile. My suggestion, never ever cut this cheese straight out of the fridge. Every time I need to cut a cheese like this, and this goes for Grana and also for Parm, I always temper it overnight. I just leave it out on the counter overnight, and that should be a huge help. I use Parm tools to open the wheel, especially with Piave, and then once you have the wheel open, it should be much easier to put it put it on the table wire. How do we do that if we're doing cut to order? Ambient display. A lot of the cheeses that are harder to cut, if they're cold, I do ambient displays on top of the counter or, you know, on a side table. And that makes it much easier. You know, I put, you know, during the winter time, I put Sprins on top of the counter. I hope that helps. I hope these are helpful suggestions. All right, we have a few more minutes. Oh, Sprins is just another cheese that I have difficulty cutting with a wire. It's a Swiss cheese. Actually, the cheese that Parmigiano Reggiano was based off of. Fun facts. We only have a few more minutes and we have a few more cheeses to get through. So I'm gonna go right into Asiago. We have two different types of Asiago. We have the Fresco, which means fresh or young. Then we also have Stagionato, which means more seasoned. Or the verbatim translation is seasoned, but in this situation, it does mean aged. And you can see the different age profiles on the slides here when we go through them. So Asiago is named for the Alpine plateau where it originated, which is also in the Veneto, just like Piave. And then it specifically is from 4 provinces. So Vicenza, Trento, Padua, and Treviso. And it is one of the oldest cheeses from this region. It's been produced since the year 1000 and was sometimes used as currency to pay rent to feudal lords. Very valuable cheese. Originally actually made with sheep's milk, but as dairy farming grew in popularity in the 1500s, the production method changed to cow's milk exclusively. The cheese is the younger version of Asiago. The Fresco is actually made with whole milk. It is not skimmed. And traditional animal rennet. And then the interesting thing about this is that the curd is cut into larger pieces. So they're about the size of walnuts. And that limits moisture loss and keeps that like really beautiful bouncy texture for the fresh version. It is also, the curds are direct salted rather than brined. So they're actually putting salt directly into the curds rather than dunking the entire wheel into a vat of brine. And again, these wheels are not pressed because they're meant to be eaten young. They're meant to have a really beautiful moist texture, and the PDO markings are added to the rind. This is a mild cheese. This is a very mild and very soft table cheese. It has this creamy texture. It's buttery, it's lactic, it's slightly yogurty. It's really, really easy to snack on. It melts beautifully. So this particular version is not meant to be aged farther than this, aged more than, I think it says 40 days on the slide. You should be enjoying Asiago Fresco at its prime, like right now. The older version, which we have, Asiago Stagionato, actually has a completely different recipe, a completely different make. The most significant difference is that the milk for Asiago Stagionato is actually skimmed rather than whole. And the curds are cut to about the size of a hazelnut, so much smaller, which we have learned both of those things contribute to moisture loss and contribute to the drier final texture of the cheese. So this is much more suitable for aging. And so we have the Asiago Fresco, we have the Asiago Stagionato. This one is aged for about 12 months. So this would be like an Asiago Vecchio, which again means old. And we can taste them together. So I've already tasted the younger one. I'm going to taste the older one now, and I would love to hear about any differences that you guys are tasting. The older one is so much more intensely buttery in flavor, not texture.
I agree. Has anybody never had fresh Asiago? I had never had it until today.
I've had it a few times. We used to cut it when I worked at Italy, but I haven't had it since then. I think that both of these cheeses would be absolutely beautiful on a sandwich with maybe, some speck, which is smoked and pressed prosciutto. For anyone who's not familiar, it's a very traditional Northern Italian cured meat. I also really like the older versions of Asiago are really great for grating, again, over maybe some risottos or some pastas. This is a really, really versatile cheese. Personally, I think out of all of them, it is the most versatile given the vast difference in age profile and the textures. Do we have any Asiago lovers?
Well, I just have to say that this is very different from Asiagos I've tried that are made in this country.
Yes,
totally
yes,
different.
It is. Absolutely.
I don't really like those.
Mm-hmm. This one is a little bit less intense. Like some of the Asiagos that I've had from America have been very peppery. They kind of have that spicy thing on the sides of the tongue. Yep. This one is much more approachable, less aggressive.
We do have an Asiago lover, Kelly White.
Great. Love to hear it. Awesome. Yes, the cheeses have been getting very positive reactions, which I'm happy about. I think that all of these cheeses are just so beautiful in their own way. The slight differences between them, that's what makes them special. They're all useful for so many different things. All right, we have one last cheese to taste today, and that is Montasio. And I think of all the cheeses here today, Montasio might be the one that the least amount of people are familiar with. Am I right in assuming that? Has anyone never heard of Montasio?
Yep.
Cool. Awesome.
People are saying never heard of it.
Yeah.
Yep. You're 100% right. Yep.
This is an Italian cheese that you absolutely should be familiar with. It is kind of like the underdog here, I think. So before I start telling you about it, let's all go ahead and try it. I love that cheese. There's so much happening. So this is actually a mountain cheese. This would be like an Italian Alpine style cheese. It is from the Friuli Venezia Giulia region, as well as a few different parts of the Veneto. It is named after the second highest peak in the Julian Alp mountain range, and that is the one that kind of goes from northern Italy to, I think, Slovenia. Historically, this cheese was actually made with 3 milks. It was made with cow, sheep, or goat. But today, because of the PDO, it's made exclusively with raw cow's milk. And we do have some different age profiles that can be found on the next slide. Again, I'm so sorry. We are tasting the Stagionato profile, I believe, which is around 10 months. And if we go to the next slide, we can definitely see that. So one more back, sorry. Yes, so the Stagionato profile is 10 months or over. And this is raw cow's milk. It's partially skimmed, and it is characterized by some very, very small eyes. And you can kind of see them there. Eyes are the cheesemonger way for saying the little holes in the cheese. As the cheese ages, it does get a little bit drier, and it does get a little bit more granular. And you can see it has like little baby tyrosine crystals that get more intense as it ages. Again, guess what? It was invented by monks. They're working overtime. And the first documents that were mentioning anything about Montasio cheese were price lists, actually, from the city of San Daniele, just like, the prosciutto San Daniele, same town. And those date back to 1775. And it records the prices for this cheese, for Montasio, being like twice the average price for any other cheese in the market. So, ever since the beginning, it has been a very sought after, very appreciated cheese. So the milk for this cheese is collected twice a day, and the evening milking specifically is skimmed. Traditional rennet is used, animal rennet, And this curd is cut into rice-sized grains. And they're using this tool called a lira, which is named after an instrument that was very dear to our friend Emperor Nero. Maybe not our friend, maybe our enemy. But that is where the name of that instrument comes from. These curds are cooked to release whey, and then the wheels are pressed, as you can probably tell from this like very dense texture of the cheese, and they're brined for 48 hours. After 100 days of aging, the consortium does firebrand the official consortium logo onto all of the wheels that pass inspection, just like the other cheeses we were talking about. And all ages of Montasio, to be perfectly honest, are excellent table cheeses. But they also pair well with cured meats and cooked vegetables because it does have very intense flavor. But the aged versions are actually also really great for dessert cheese plates. And I was eating mine with apples earlier today. It was just a beautiful pairing. It's also the main ingredient in a very traditional Friulian dish called frico, which essentially is just grated Montasio that you then put into a pan and fry very lightly. And it creates this thin, crunchy, like lacy cracker type snack, which I do as a snack, but I've also done for different catering events just to create a little bit of variety in the cheese plate. Cool. Are there any questions now that we have finished the cheese? There's just a couple of other points I want to touch on about cheese storage and care, and then we'll open it up to some questions. Does that sound good?
So Amelia, we did have a comment that the rind is, so it seems softer in the middle than at the rind. And,
yes.
and I'm not sure if you mentioned this, I noticed at least on mine, the rind, it says Menzano.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
That is different than the information. Maybe there were some different ones. I mean, it does feel a little bit younger than what I'm used to for a more aged version. So it could just be that I got the wrong information. I didn't get a piece with a rind like markings on it. But
okay. Yep.
Yeah.
And we do have a comment that
that's important. I appreciate that.
I just picked up the cheese and happened to see it, but and we also have a comment that this someone has used this a lot in polenta recipes too.
Yeah, polenta is a really traditional, like northern Italian dish. There's a lot of polenta with cheese going on up there. Sorry about that. All right, so now that we finished the cheese, I'm going to just give you a few tips for how to take care of it and how to sell it, and then we'll take some questions. For anyone who's cutting to order, which I think probably is a lot of you, always wrap this in cheese paper. You know the drill. It allows the cheese to breathe. It mimics the conditions of the aging cave and just keeps this cheese fresher, longer, and provides our customers with the best flavor experience. And if we give them a good experience the first time, they're going to keep coming back. So giving the customers a good experience every time is only beneficial for us. It's beneficial for the producers. It's good for everyone involved in the process. I always tell my customers, don't store it in plastic wrap and don't freeze your cheese. My advice is always buy less cheese more often. So buy less cheese, but buy cheese more often. That again ensures that your customers always have the freshest product possible. If you are not cutting to order and instead you're cutting for retail cases, for grab and goes, and you're wrapping everything in plastic, it's just something that you can't avoid if you're working for a higher volume store, because customers do eat with their eyes and they need to be able to see the cheese in the plastic wrap before they grab it and go. So it's up to you to decide that what is the best size to cut based on your customers' buying patterns, based on the price point of the cheese, and just making sure that your end goal is making sure that you're rotating the cut pieces in a way that gets the customer the freshest piece possible. So these are all very popular, very snackable cheeses with reasonable price points in my opinion. So in my store, we've had success cutting them anywhere between a third to a half a pound. But I also, whenever I'm deciding what size to cut these pieces, I think about the optics of the price tag, right? People are going to look at the number before they consider how much cheese they actually need. So anything in my experience, this might be different depending on like what market you're in. In my experience, anything between $7 and $12 is not a scary price tag to see for a customer. So that's kind of going to be your sweet spot there. And then for retail and ambient displays, like something I was mentioning earlier about the Piave, it's important to kind of to take note of how much cheese you're actually going to sell in maybe like a 2 or 3 day period, because anything that's out of the fridge, it's going to be under those harsh fluorescent lights. The quality is going to decline more quickly than if it were in a case. So I'm only doing, 2 to 3 days worth of cut pieces. And then once those are gone, I'm going to cut more. Just to make sure, again, we're giving the customer the freshest product possible. That's not going to taste like plastic. It's not going to get bleached under the lights. Just an all around good experience. So I also like to limit the ambient displays that I'm doing based on the season. In the winter, when your store is colder, it's much easier to do that in the summer when it's really hot. So that's all I have for today. And if anyone has any questions, I just want to say thank you so much to everyone for logging on today. Thank you to Culture and Agriform for having me for this presentation. And I hope you learned something, and I hope that you have a newfound appreciation for these cheeses.
Thank you, Emilia. It's amazing. I know there's so much more. To get through 6 cheeses is a lot, and you did an amazing job. We do have a question. How are you wrapping the cut larger pieces of Parmesan?
Larger pieces like eighths and quarters and halves?
I'm not sure, but yes, according to this person. Yep.
I'm wrapping them in plastic wrap and putting them on ambient display. That being said, I'm going through a wheel of Parm a week in my shop. So if I were going through less, what I would do is I would put a piece of like deli wrap on the face, or like we call it Logan wrap, deli wrap, wax paper, whatever you guys call it. If I'm storing a quarter wheel of Parm for a really long time, I'm going to put that wax paper on the face and then plastic wrap it and then put it in the walk-in, like under the fans.
Sounds good. We have a question that I would like to answer. This from Jonathan. Yes, Jonathan, you will have access to the recording. It will be on our YouTube channel, and we are going to be sending out an email that's going to have the link to that. So you can, it'll all be there for you to revisit, because I know it was a lot to take in. And one thing I also want to mention, and we need some help with some vendors, particularly when it comes to Montasio. The folks that asked those questions, can you, Emilia? No?
I can only obviously speak to vendors in like the New York area. I want to say that World's Best Cheese carries it, but it may be a pre-order. I would say, like, ask your rep.
Okay, well, we will have access to the chat internally at Culture, and those of you who asked about vendors, we can get back to you on that. I want to say that in addition to thanking Emilia and thanking Agriform AOP, and thank you all of you for being here today. If you don't know, we are launching Counterculture Live again for 2023. And we are going to have 6 of them. We have the dates all picked out. We are going to start on the 21st of March at the Fork at Point Reyes Farmstead Cheese out in Point Reyes, California. And if you don't know about Counterculture, it's kind of like this, but with more than one producer of cheese. We bring together buyers and producers in an interactive, intimate atmosphere, and they're fun and educational and a wonderful chance to network and learn. Yeah, so Emilia's participated in them and helped out with them and led workshops. So we really hope to see you there. If you check our website under For the Trade at the top, you can see the dates of all of the other Counterculture Lives for the year. And if you haven't signed up for a newsletter, which you probably have, you can sign up, and that's how you'll get the latest information. So we have 1 more minute left, so I'm going to leave one more minute here for last minute questions. Anybody else? Oh, there's 6 new messages here. Oh my God. Okay. We have all kinds of thank yous. Delicious for the stomach as well as the brain. That's awesome.
I'm so glad you guys enjoyed it. These are some of my favorite cheeses, and I was really happy to share them with you.
Oh, great. Thank you. Oh, any tips on participating in the CMI?
Oh God. Believe in yourself and ask for help if you need it. Everyone is willing to help you. Also, a quarter pound is a lot smaller than you think it is.
Very good advice. Yes. Having judged a couple of them, I'm so impressed with everything everyone does. So, well, thanks everybody. It's 5 o'clock. We really appreciate your time. We appreciate you, Emilia. We appreciate these delicious cheeses from Europe, and hope to see you all in person at one of our Counterculture Live events this year. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thanks, guys. Have a great night.